Hello, my name is Mintaek Lim from ADAS Lab, Seoul National University, and today I will present the paper titled On the Rankability of Visual Embeddings. This paper was posted on arXiv around a few weeks ago, which is very recent work and not yet published on any conference or journal. The reason why I choose this paper is that this paper contains very new and interesting insight about visual embeddings. The contents will be as follows. First, I'll explain what is rankability, since it is not a well-known notion in the vector database and embedding field. Then continue to how to define it and measure it. Third, we'll dive into the paper contents. We will check whether visual embeddings are rankable or not, and how to find the rank axis, which I'll explain in later slides. And then I'll conclude this presentation with a short discussion. So the first part begins with what is rankability. Before explaining about rankability, I'll briefly recapture the usual usage of visual embeddings in image retrieval task. Visual embeddings are vector which capture semantic meaning of a given image encoded by a specific image encoder or embedding model. To retrieve image for a given query image, we first have to construct an image database and encode it to vector database. Then encode the given query image with the same encoder and compute the distance between the base vectors in database and embedded query image. Finally, by sorting the corresponding image from image database by distance, we got images from database which are most similar to query image. It is how we used image retriever in most cases before this paper arose. As I explained in previous slide, prior works focused on image retrieval task, which relies on local similarity search. But this paper brought new concept, which they called global ordering and rankability to vector embeddings. Ranking requires global ordering along a specific attribute, and the author claimed that it is also a core operation in database systems. For example, one user might want to check all the data in sorted order by given attribute condition like how formal the shoes look. So far I have covered what is rankability, and now I'll continue to how to define it and measure it in more formal way. Here comes the definition of rankability of visual embeddings. A representation or embedding model F is rankable for a given attribute A if there exists a rank axis V of A, such that if data point x1 has bigger attribute than x2, then projection of x1 to VA is also bigger than that of x2. So the figure on the right shows the example for this definition. Assuming each point indicates picture of person and the given attribute is age. If x2 is younger than x1, then the magnitude of projection of x2 to VA, or red arrow, in the figure is smaller than that of x1. By this rank axis, we can sort all base vectors for a given attribute, and if it is possible, we say the embedding model is rankable. This slide explains how to measure rankability. The author used Spearman's rank correlation coefficient as a main metric to measure rankability. The score is defined as low and calculated by difference between predicted ranking and true ranking. This score can vary between the value +1 to -1, and if it becomes to 1, it means two rankings are perfectly matched, and if it's -1, it means exactly opposite ordering. If low is around 0, it means there are no correlation between two orderings. The main content of this paper is to check the rankability of visual embeddings. Since this paper is experimental paper, they don't propose new method or running paradigm, but have done extensive experiments to support their findings. Before explaining the main results, I'll first introduce about experimental setting how they measure rankability of visual embeddings. So to test the rankability of given image encoder, they train a simple linear regressor which predicts the attribute of given embedding vector. So we have an image ZX and visual embedding model F, which is suspected to be rankable. And the embedded vector of xi and corresponding attribute AI is used as a training data for this regressor. By training so, they are able to extract linear ordering of image embeddings by calculating that score that I mentioned previously with predicted attribute. There are three baselines to compare the rankability. First baseline acts as a lower bound of given visual embedding model. This baseline is set with non-trained embedding model. So the embedding model will return almost random vectors and train the same linear regressor as before. The author mentioned even with random initialized encoder, the correlation between predicted ordering and true ordering is not zero, it's positive number. So they used this score as a lower bound. Second baseline is called nonlinear, which play a role of upper bound for embedding. They trained two-layer MLP to estimate the ordering, and of course they used trained embedding model F. Since two-layer MLP is well known as universal approximator, so we can assume it will extract every internal ranking information from the embedding space. So it will be the upper bound for given embedding space. Third baseline include fine-tuning the given embedding model and MLP with end-to-end manner, so it will be the upper bound for embedding model architecture. By fine-tuning embedding model with ordinal information, we will be able to predict attribute much better than previous method, which will be the best effort from the given embedding model structure. Finally, from this slide, the main part of this paper, the experimental results have started. This table shows which dataset and embedding architecture they used in experiment. As on the upper table, they used 9 different datasets which has the attribute of age, crowd count, athletics, etc. And 7 different popular image encoders are used. 3 from clip-based and 4 from non-clip-based. Here comes the qualitative results. The images are sorted with attribute ordering information from age to athletics. As you can see, the number above the image indicates predicted ranking and the bottom number is predicted attributes. It seems like the linear regressor is able to find a good ranking axis and the visual encoder, whatever they used in the result, is rankable. This table is the result of averaged rankability over all encoder architectures. The red rectangle box shows rankability of the linear regressor and all other columns are baselines, from lower bound to upper bound. As you can check from the number on the table, it turns out in most experimental settings, the scores appear in the range of 0.6 to 0.9, which is quite high. From this table, the author mentioned the SPCC score of main is much closer to upper bound rather than lower bound, which supports that visual embeddings are generally rankable. Now they go deeper to the result by measuring SPCC scores across datasets and models. The main finding from this table is that clip-based embeddings are generally more rankable than non-clip-based embeddings. But still, on most cases, the SPCC scores are bigger than 0.5, which means they are meaningful correlation between true ranking and implicit one from embedding space. Additionally, for the cells with exceptionally low scores, the author suspects that those are due to low quality of training data. Either training samples are skewed to specific direction of attribute, or the absolute number of data was not sufficient. So now we know visual embeddings are generally rankable, but the remaining question is how can we find the rank axis? In the previous experiment, they used linear regressor with full trained data, and from now on we will see how to simplify the process finding rank axis and corresponding performance. The paper suggests 2 different lighter alternatives. First alternative is called fusion learning with labels, which means they use only fraction of training data and nothing else. Very simple. And the second one is more interesting. It doesn't include learning and called steering vector approach with extreme non-labeled pairs. To get rank axis by this way, first we get pair of upper extreme images and lower extreme images somehow, and calculate the centroid vector of each extreme group. Then just connect the two centroid and use that line for rank axis. Results are shown below. The purple line indicates extreme steering vector approach and blue line indicates few-shot learning. The x-axis shows how many samples are used to find axis, and the y-axis referred to as PCC scores. From these results, the author claimed when the number of samples are very few, even no learning method show good performance on finding good ranking axis. Until the number of training data is near to 2 to the power of 7, extreme no learning method seems to predict better ranking axis than few-shot learning method. They tested on 6 different settings, and across most of them, same trend can be observed. For the last part for this presentation, I want to more talk about the discussion related to the findings of this paper. So what does visual embedding is rankable means? From various experimental results, we saw the visual embeddings are generally rankable, which means they contain ordinal information within the embedding space even when they were not trained on. We can think the embedding space indeed form rankable structure, and this property means one can potentially interpret embedding space as explainable space. It is quite amazing when we remind that embeddings are in latent space and it is not interpretable in general. Next discussion point will be related to my own research field. Currently, I'm working on hybrid query and indexing, which tries to design new data structure to index and search vector data with attribute filters. But like the paper claimed, if embedding space itself contains all the attribute information in it, and somehow we can extract it, then we don't need to design very complicated and dedicated structure for hybrid indexing as shown in the figure. Related to this concern, my answer would be, but still we need hybrid indexing because having rankability doesn't mean embedding preserve all the attribute information. It can only be applied to continuous and ordinal attributes. For example, if the attribute is related to species of animal and the value of that attribute would be cat and dog, there is no reasonable ordering between them. So in this case, we still need a dedicated indexing structure for hybrid data. Thank you for listening to my presentation, and if you have any question or want to discuss anything with me, you're welcome to email me.